a really notable woman, Anita Hill, a professor, showed the courage of a lifetime, talking about her experience being harassed by Clarence Thomas. We knew a lot less about the extent of harassment back then, over 30 years ago. But she paid a terrible price. She was abused through the hearing. She was taken advantage of. Her reputation was attacked. I wish I could have done something. I opposed Clarence Thomas' nomination. I voted against him. But I also realized there was a real and perceived problem the committee faced. There were a bunch of white guys. No, I mean it sincerely. A bunch of white guys hearing this testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So when Anita Hill came to testify, she faced a committee that didn't fully understand what the hell it was all about. To this day, I regret I couldn't come up with a way to get her the kind of hearing she deserved, given the courage she showed by reaching out to us. The hearing she deserved was a hearing where she was respected, where the tone of the questioning was not hostile and insulting, where the fact that she stepped forward was recognized as an act of courage in and of itself. Because let's face it, back in 1991, it took a lot of courage to take on a man who was so much a part of the establishment. It took a lot of courage to damage her own career and her own reputation in the face of the cultural bias that if a woman was harassed or abused, she must have done something to deserve it. It still takes courage. Nearly 30 years later, and I publicly apologized to Anita because she didn't get the hearing she deserved. And the Senate Judiciary Committee has the power and obligation to set a standard for the nation. It should not be one of the most difficult places for a woman to lay out a story of abuse and harassment. And yet last fall you saw it all over again in the Kavanaugh hearing. Almost 30 years, the culture, the institutional culture has not changed. And that diminishes the likelihood that other women will come forward knowing what they're going to face. When a woman sees a distinguished professor or a lawyer subject to that kind of cultural backlash, whether it was Dr. Ford or Professor Hill, saw what they endured, it's understandable that they're reluctant to step forward and tell their own stories of harassment or abuse. Folks, I realize I get a little too passionate about this sometimes, but we all have an obligation to do nothing less than change the culture in this country. Not just the laws. We change the laws. Change the culture. The culture. You all know what the phrase rule of thumb means? Where it's derived from? In English common law, not codification, common law. Back in the late 1300s, so many women were dying at the hands of their husbands because they were a chattel, just like the cattle or the sheep, that the court of common law decided they had to do something about the extent of the death. So you know what they said? No man has a right to chastise his woman with a rod thicker than the circumference of his thumb. This is English jurisprudential culture, a white man's culture. It's got to change. It's got to change.